Hey y'all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today I'm going to be talking about giant monsters, about kaiju, about the big boss that you want to put into your game, the dragon, the Etten. Want to talk about a brontosaurus, the hydra, uh, a rock, a island turtle, any number of giant animals, giant human beings, giant beasts, big. That's what we're talking about. The Colossus, the Clockwork Goliath, and how to do it. Uh, uh, it's a very different mode of play. Fighting someone your size versus fighting someone even twice your size. Think about fighting a rhinoceros, a hippopotamus, an elephant. Uh, that's a very, very different challenge than fighting just another man. I mean, even fighting a man who's 7 feet tall or 8 feet tall, like that can be a real challenge. But then you talk about 12 feet tall and you only come up to his waist. You're in for a world of hurt right there. So I wanted to share kind of how I do it. And basically, if we could go back, Shadow of the Colossus. It's a great video game. You should all look it up. I'll check it out. But basically, you have to climb on top of the beasts, get up to their vulnerable point, and then inflict damage on that point. And I love to do it this way. I love grappling in my games, jumping on the back of the beast, running up its tail, clinging to the wing, taking the two daggers, and just sticking it in the belly and climbing up its belly towards its throat. Whatever you have to do it right. And this can vary, certainly depending on the size of the creature. If it's 12 feet tall, there's only so much that you can do to climb on it versus if it's 50 feet tall versus even larger. It could be 500 feet tall. Godzilla stomping around Tokyo. You could be fighting Giant Man from the Avengers, Ultraman, whatever you want to get up to. So these are great scenes. They're a great chance to think out of the box, to try to use your environment as a weapon, to try to gang up on this larger threat. So let's discuss some of those different methodologies. Number one, gang up on it. In my games, maybe 75% of the time or more, the way to fight something big, like a dragon, a giant, brontosaurus, is to get a lot of dudes together to fight it, preferably with like pikes, something, or catapults, bows, where you can keep your distance and not get squashed so easily. So this usually, then this can be the whole focus of the campaign. Get an army together to fight against the giant, the mountain giant coming down from the World's Edge Mountains. You have to get all the hobbits together to fight against it. That could be a whole campaign right there. And you've got to get the pikemen out front, get them trained. You've got to get the cavalry riding St. Bernards, running around its legs, hit and run tactics, throwing javelins. You've got to get the slingers backing up the pikemen. Maybe you can get a sky ship, raining fire, shooting cannonballs, dropping rocks, whatever you have to do. Get some elves in there to help you, riding giant eagles with their composite bows. And basically wear it down, whittle away, 1,000 arrows into its hide, so it eventually stumbles and falls because of blood loss. So that's like my number one way, the number one go-to, because it's the most realistic. And in some ways it's the least cinematic because it's the most believable. But when you have a whole army, I find it usually it's very cinematic, despite the realism. So to me it's like the best of both worlds, So that's way number one, conventional tactics, outnumber it. Way number two could be the terrain. This is still in the realm of convention. So, can you drop a boulder on it, a mountain, a tree? You use these big weapons like catapults, maybe a battering ram if properly positioned. If you got your city gate and he's going to barge through, maybe a 12-foot tall ogre, you take your battering ram right up next to the gate and you just pull it back that ram and just hold it there. And as soon as he comes through the gate, you release it and it crashes into the side of his head. His teeth go shooting out the other side, and he falls down, and now he's blocking the gate, so the orcs can't get through. Or maybe collapse the gate on top of him. Boiling oil, fire, something that's a small number of people can use to accomplish this end, rather than a whole army. So push a wall over on him, perhaps. Trip up his legs, set a pit trap, something that's still realistic, but it's devious enough to work even when you're outnumbered. So that's way number 2. And then way number 3, the most cinematic, the least believable, is that Colossus climb. And you can get your skill checks involved here. Climbing up his legs, jumping, perhaps from, jump from his arm out onto his weapon. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could, or it could be the opposite. You could, let's say it's the opposite. So he's got a giant sword. He swings. You make your dodge check. All right, I dodged it. Now let's get some agility or reflexes to grab the sword blade. And when he picks it up, I'm on the end of his sword. Now I make my jump test from the sword onto his shoulder. Balance test to not fall off. Perhaps even while I'm drawing my sword off my back. And now I can hit him right in the throat from his shoulder. 2 hands right into the jugular with my long sword. And maybe that'll take him out. Maybe I get a coup de grace bonus. Maybe I get a times 5 damage to a vulnerable area of whatever it is, to make it realistic that I've hit that vulnerable section. Maybe I take my a punching dagger. I've got my gauntlet. I click my hand up inside, and it's got a dagger on the end, and I'm up on his shoulder, and I grab him by the ear, and I swing around, and I drive that dagger into his eyeball as hard as I can, and I'm up to my shoulder in his eye socket. And maybe I'm able to blind him that way. Maybe it's a Cyclops, and I've blinded him now. So basically using your skill checks, balance, climb, dodge. When he's coming down and he's starting to hit you on his shoulder, make your dodge test there, reflexes, agility, whatever it is in your system, acrobatics. You can have jump tests. Basically any kind of skill test that you think might be relevant on there. Can be like use rope. You get a rope tied around his wrist, and you run up around his head. And now you sling that rope around his head, and he goes to throw a punch, and he strangles himself, or he doesn't have the range anymore because he's tied up, and he's got to invest some time in freeing himself. Whatever it is, this is the place to think outside the box when you don't have anything to use. A lot of rule sets do that very poorly, but all you really need to do is get your skill tests and determine what you can do in your turn, and what he can do in his turn to counter that. And you just move closer and closer to that goal, narrate it as you go, think logically or illogically about what would be the next test or challenge to face, and you can get through it. And whether it's just a climb test to get up onto his back, or a grapple test if he's only 10 feet tall, or whatever it is, you could definitely make giant monster battles very cinematic. And as long as you have the realism in place to say, does he have a jugular you can hit? Can you reach his eyeball? Maybe if it's a brontosaurus, you might need to climb up his whole neck. But maybe you could chop the neck off right at the base. If it's a dragon, he can be in flight while this is happening. Or he can be trying to clip his wings while holding on to his wings. Or, maybe he's got that vulnerable section right under his neck, and you've got to stab into it so when he breathes fire, his neck explodes with flames, and he hurts himself. So there's a ton of things you can do. It could be a charging buffalo. You've got to get on his back and wrangle him to the ground, or just wrestle him to the ground like a beast. And how difficult that would be when you're talking about something the size of a bison or a buffalo. So I just wanted to share that this is something that a lot of rule sets don't do well, but if you apply some realism, foresight, forethought, and just stick to the rules of your world, use your skill tests, and try to be open-minded and say yes to the players, get some really great scenes out of this. And I challenge you to put down a Colossus climb in your campaign as soon as possible. I don't care if it's space opera, you got a Rancor to deal with, if it's a giant sandworm on Dune, if it's the white ape of Barsoom, or if it's a medieval or a modern setting and it's an elephant that's escaped from the zoo, if it's a giant crocodile that's escaped from the circus and is going wild in the audience, and you've got to figure out how to take it out from the bleachers. So throw this into your campaign, see what you can do with it to make it fun and interesting. Work around your rules. If it's a good system, you won't have to work too hard. If it's Pathfinder, you might have to work very hard. But I think there's a lot of mileage and to change up the pace. Just like you want to throw in a chase scene now and then, a mystery now and then, combat now and then, get a giant combat as well. So let me know how you do these. If there are any rule sets that do them especially well, I'd love to hear about that too. Leave that in the comments below. Let me know when you've seen them done poorly as well and what went wrong. And that's about it for the Giant Monster Man. Until I see you again, good day and good gaming.